somebody to lean on.
From the shoot results and that we have to question for you.
Thanks. Delighted to be here. Thanks very much.
So what are you going to do for us young people as a politician for the election?
Well, firstly, we'll be campaigning for good quality jobs. I think that that's a huge problem for young people these days, is that there's no access to quality, long-term, pensionable employment that there would have been in the past. And we're seeing young people in particular are on precarious work contracts, 0-hour contracts. Youth unemployment still is sky high in Dublin North West, and we feel that we have to, have a good quality employment for young people.
What about such as resource centres? Is that in your priorities, to look after youth centres and get more funding for them?
Well, certainly it is. I mean, if you look at the cuts that have taken place to the North West Area Partnership and a whole plethora of resource centres across the constituency and across the country, and they're having a huge detrimental impact on communities, and in particular working class communities where these types of centres are so key.
At Halloween you always have a festival and I never really see any politicians there. Will you be there this year if you get elected?
Definitely, if you let me know.
It's on Halloween every year.
If I'm not elected, I'll be delighted to attend as well. Yeah.
A lot of young people I know have a lot of great business ideas, but we all can't get funding for it. Is that something you'd work on? We are saying about employment, that would bring a lot of employment to the community.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the Workers' Party is proposing that there be a state enterprise board and a state investment bank, and we're quite unique in saying that. We feel that working class people come up with very good initiatives and ideas in terms of what work should be, and we feel that the state should invest in cooperatives, in workers' cooperatives. That would mean working class people coming together and setting up businesses based on cooperative principles. And that they would be funded by the co-op movement, by the credit unions and by the state, and we feel that that's a way of getting the unemployment rate down and creating good quality jobs. But that would also mean that working class people would be in control as opposed to big business, which in many instances doesn't treat workers very well.
And what about education? Is that fees going to keep going up, and or are they going to come down or stay down?
Our position is that there should be education free from entry to when you leave, so from primary education through to third level, and including childcare, the preschool as well. And we feel that has to be funded through a progressive taxation system. We don't feel that the wealthy are paying enough tax. And in particular, multinational corporations aren't paying enough tax. And we would point to the fact that businesses in Ireland have the second lowest employer PRSI across Europe. We don't feel that's correct. Why are businesses paying so little, and then working class students are having to pay exorbitant registration fees and having their grants cut? We don't think it's a moral justification.
Do you not see that the low tax that companies pay is the reason they come to Ireland? Would you not put it that way?
No.
That's the way I would say from business and stuff.
Yeah. Not at all, actually. And if you look at the likes of Dell and Intel, they've been quite open and honest in saying, look, yes, the low corporation tax is an issue, but it's not the only issue. And you've got obviously an English-speaking country, access to the Eurozone, highly educated population. They're the reasons they're here. And also, if we keep our corporation tax low, it's not keeping multinationals here. We've seen huge job losses over the last 5-6 years. And the reality is that these companies are moving to countries that also have low corporation tax, but more importantly, have very low wages. And ultimately, that's the race to the bottom that workers across the world are facing at the moment. We have to keep our wages low, keep our working conditions low, and keep corporate tax low, all in the name of keeping business here. We feel that there should be an indigenous economy created in Ireland where as I say, should be state led, should be cooperative led, and that ultimately we need to kind of reindustrialisation of Ireland's economy like we had in the past. You know, at the moment, all the jobs that are in the economy that are being created in many instances are service jobs, call centre jobs, not particularly good quality work, you know, and I think an awful lot of young people who've been promised an awful lot are coming out of college, coming out of their training courses, coming out of the trades that they were looking to do, and they're not particularly happy with the employment that they're finding.
How would you tackle the homeless crisis?
So we're involved in a housing campaign called the Finglas Housing Action Group, and that included in that there's people who are having issues with the sky high rents, people who are having issues with maintenance problems and with the council, and homeless people as well. And we feel that homeless people within communities have to come together and organise and start really getting their voices heard, because that's a serious issue that's not being raised. We're not really hearing about the stories, you know. We meet weekly at the moment, and we're holding protests across the constituency and in the city centre and linking up with other homeless groups. And ultimately, the way to solve that, I mean, that's one part, you know, that's kind of raising the issue, but that's not the solution either, you know. We're very aware that the solution will be ultimately creating and building social housing, and not leaving it into the hands of private developers. I don't know if you're aware, but in Oscar Traynor Road, St Michael's in Inchicore, and also in O'Devney in Arbour Hill recently, that land was leased to developers for €1. That should be built on by the social, by the state, and that has to happen now. And also it will create jobs, you know, and that's the other key point to this.
You said earlier about taxing the wealthy. What do you consider wealthy?
Good question. I think I'd answer that with what I consider people not being wealthy, and I think they're in the vast majority of people, the people who are really struggling with childcare costs, with the water tax, with the property tax, with the high levels of USE. But ultimately, I think anyone who earns over 80,000, 90,000 euro should have to pay a fair share, you know.
But
And
they
even
pay 41%, you know, so that is a fair share.
it's actually well below what the EU average would be for people on those incomes, you know. And our position as well, leaving aside people on those types of income, let's look at the real wealth. You know, you've 20,000 odd millionaires in Ireland, they need to be taxed. Importantly as well, the people who are on the highest wages, in many instances use tax loopholes to not pay the appropriate tax rate. And what the Workers' Party is proposing is a minimum effective rate of tax, which means that regardless of what tax loophole or tax break that you have, if you earn over 100,000 euro, you should have to pay 50% on anything above that. And ultimately, that's how you fund services, and you know that's where the wealth is in society. You know?
You said water taxes. I have to ask you, where do you stand on the water charges?
So we're very clear on this. We feel that with the levels of non-payment as high as they are at the moment, well over 50%, probably about 55%. And Irish Waters themselves saying that that's not feasible in terms of investment coming into that utility. We're calling explicitly for people to keep the boycott up. And there were campaigns of non-payment in the 80s and in the 90s that were successful in defeating water charges, and we feel that needs to be replicated, because ultimately, let's be very clear about this. This isn't about, you know, the fact that there's not enough money in society. This is about privatising water services. And if you look at the examples across Europe, it's been an unmitigated disaster. And in a lot of instances in Paris, in Scotland, they're actually renationalising water services.
You got any more? What about healthcare services, like the hospitals,
ultimately, I think if you look again at the amount of investment that's gone into health, it's well below the OECD average. And for a country which is quite, you know, has decent levels of GDP growth, that has to be rectified, so we need more investment. But also we need to end the two-tier healthcare system. We don't feel that it's in any way justifiable that private healthcare companies get massive subsidies from the state. Any state investment should go into state services and not into allowing these private companies to make massive money, ultimately at people in misery, you know. People who are in the healthcare system deserve appropriate services, and there shouldn't be someone commodifying their illness at the end of the day. And also ultimately as well, we would call for any consultants who are being paid by the state, they can't do a job, that has to end. If you're being paid by the state, you should only work for the state and not for private healthcare companies.
don't understand why there's mistreatment in nursing homes. Like the elderly are supposed to be cared for, not mistreated. Like,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, there has to be an inquiry into that. I think there's one that's sort of tentatively looked into it, but it didn't go anywhere near far enough. Also, again, there can no longer be private nursing homes. It has to be state-led. You know, there shouldn't be someone making money out of, you know, looking after elderly people. These are people who pay taxes for their whole lives. They've built the society that we're living in right now. They deserve to be looked after. And again, I feel like since the austerity agenda has been driven in through this country over the last 8 or 9 years, elderly people have really suffered. And you know, with the 3-year-old rise in their pension recently, it was an absolute slap in the face. You know,
It was a joke, wasn't it? What you call it? It's €55 or €6 to go to the doctor. I think that's ridiculous. I think your rent is going to do it though.
well, we don't feel that you should have to pay to go to the doctor. We feel that should come out of general taxation. And the same with medical cards. I've met an awful lot of people who've had their medical cards taken off them. And if you're ill, regardless of your income, you should receive a medical card. Again, the way you would fund that is always the question that's thrown at people who say, you know, these sort of things are being populist. Well, let's look at prescription charges, for example. Let's look at the cost of medical care. Again, you know, let's use generic drugs rather than always the most expensive ones. Now that is being phased in slowly, but it has to happen much quicker.
Okay, that's it. Go ahead.
Ultimately as well, you know, again, it goes back to general taxation should fund these things. You know, if you want a progressive society, you need a progressive taxation system, and we should always be made to pay for services. People are paying enough through the general taxation.
and the park where near me in Shawnee is right next to like a rehabilitation centre, and sometimes I do see people like injecting themselves when I'm walking the dogs, and then they throw like syringes on the ground. Like, what if a small child could?
There's a lot of small children in that area that is.
There was only cans there the other day, and we've cans there a few times over the last period of
I
time.
just think it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things on that. Firstly, number one, it needs to be policed better, and the Garda resources that have been taken out of the area are just, there's again, not justifiable. But also, more importantly, we'd ask the question, why is it that these drug rehabilitation centres always go into working class areas? Why don't we see them in Blackrock? Why don't we see them in Foxrock, etc.?
They park their cars to stop it happening.
Exactly.
There's an element to that as well, but there's also a point that you know, social housing is never built in these areas, and all of the sort of the things that are considered to be generally from the public system and to resolve the crisis of poverty are never going to go into wealthy areas. Why is it that West Finglas is getting a drug rehabilitation clinic and not Blackrock? You know, that's the question. We think it's pretty clear. But again, I think immediate as well, there's a proposal from the residents in that area to have the entrance at the other side of the clinic, which I think would really help the situation as well in relation to the problems that have come up.
I can't think of any more.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right.